how a wife, dissatisfied with the lack of physical satisfaction in her marriage, conspires with her lovers to commit a heinous crime. Today's heartbreaking story comes from Assam, India. Vandana, a resident, approaches the police station to file a missing persons report for her husband and mother-in-law. Tearfully, she tells the police about their sudden disappearance. The police console her and begin questioning her about her life. Vandana reveals that she married her husband, Amar Jyoti, against her family's wishes. Amar Jyoti's mother also opposed the marriage, but the couple ignored these objections and tied the knot. After their wedding, Vandana moved into Amar Jyoti's house, where he lived with his wealthy mother. His mother owned 4 houses, living in one and renting out the others. She had significant property in the local area and suspected Vandana married her son solely for money. However, Vandana worked to change her mother-in-law's perception over time. They developed a strong bond, and her mother-in-law even offered to help Vandana with her career aspirations. Vandana expressed her desire to open a gym and become a fitness trainer. Her mother-in-law financed the venture, covering all the investments required for the gym and Vandana's training. Vandana shared that after that, communication between her husband and mother-in-law completely stopped. They no longer connected emotionally or mentally. They would hardly speak once or twice a month over the phone, and it had been a long time since they had met. One day, after returning from the gym, Vandana noticed her husband was missing. She called her mother-in-law's house, but after several calls, there was no response. Deciding not to waste any time, Vandana went directly to her mother-in-law's house, only to find she was also missing. Without hesitation, she rushed to the police station to report the disappearances. The police assured Vandana that they would help her find her husband and mother-in-law. For the next 2 months, she visited the station frequently, asking for updates, but the investigation seemed to go nowhere. There were no clues, and the police seemed to be at a loss. Eventually, Vandana decided to approach the CID for assistance in locating her missing family members. Then, something significant happened. Her husband's cousin went to the police station and claimed that Vandana was behind the disappearances. He pointed out that money was being withdrawn from her mother-in-law's account, and he suspected that Vandana might be involved, possibly even harming her husband and mother-in-law for money. Just as the police began processing this information, Vandana arrived at the police station to report the same thing: money being withdrawn from her mother-in-law's account. She also mentioned that she suspected her husband's cousin. At this point, the police found it suspicious that 2 people were reporting the same issue, but blaming each other. They decided to keep both Vandana and her husband's cousin under surveillance. The police first checked the ATS camera footage, and they found something crucial. The CCTV footage clearly showed that it was Vandana who had withdrawn the money from her mother-in-law's account. This discovery prompted the police to start gathering more information on Vandana, speaking to her neighbors and even people at her gym. They soon learned that Vandana had a questionable reputation in the neighborhood. Vandana had relationships with several men, and many different men would visit her regularly. However, there were 2 men who started visiting frequently, and they became familiar faces over the past few months. The police didn't waste any time and brought Vandana in for questioning. They showed her the camera footage, and while Vandana could have denied it, she fabricated a story. She claimed she suspected her husband's cousin, but there was no evidence, so she blamed him for withdrawing the money to divert the police's attention. The police quickly saw through her story and questioned her strictly. Eventually, Vandana made a shocking confession. She explained that her marriage to her husband had initially been normal, filled with love and physical attraction, but over time, she was no longer satisfied with him. This led to several issues between them. Vandana ran a gym, and many men came there, which made her attracted to them. Though she was a married woman, she couldn't act on her feelings until two men joined her gym. One was a taxi driver, and the other was his friend. Vandana noticed that they looked at her differently, and their intentions seemed different too. She might have welcomed this attention, so she invited them over to her house when her husband wasn't home. The two men came over, and after taking the first step, Vandana didn't resist. They became physically involved, and this continued for a few days, eventually becoming a regular occurrence. Vandana felt this was what she was meant for, as she was finally getting the satisfaction and happiness she had been missing in her life. Soon, Vandana started inviting more men from her gym over to her house on a daily basis. The two men, the taxi driver and his friend, continued to visit regularly. Despite all this, Vandana had no intention of leaving her husband. She just wanted to maintain her secret relationships with other men while still being married. However, one day her husband came home early from work. He noticed a taxi outside their house and tried to enter, but found the door locked. He then tried to peek through the window, and what he saw shocked him to his core. Vandana, naked, in a compromising situation with two men. He must have been devastated. He screamed, rushed inside, and a fight broke out. The two men fled, but Vandana's husband told her he wanted a divorce. He couldn't continue living with her after what he had seen. Vandana realized that without him, she would lose everything, including all the property. She begged him to stay, promised it would never happen again, but he was too shaken to continue. The next day, Vandana planned her next move. She invited the two men over again, and together they devised a plan to murder her husband and mother-in-law, ensuring all the property would be transferred to her. Vandana took one of the men to her mother-in-law's house, where they killed her. Afterward, the two men cut her mother-in-law's body into small pieces, placing them into 3 plastic bags and storing them in her fridge. They cleaned the area, and Vandana returned home, waiting for her husband. When he came home, she offered him juice, but it had been laced with sedatives. As soon as her husband passed out, she called the two men, and they did the same to her husband, cutting him into pieces, placing them into 3 bags, and storing them in the fridge. They waited until midnight, collected the bags, and put them in the taxi of one of the men. They traveled 150 kilometers away and disposed of the 6 bags in a drain. When Vandana recounted the story at the police station, it shocked everyone to the core. How a person could commit such horrific acts over property and physical desires. Vandana then led the police to the spot where they began searching for the body parts. Unfortunately, they only found pieces of her mother-in-law's arms, legs, and hands. The neck was missing, and there were no body parts of her husband. The suspects were arrested, but the horrifying thing was that when Vandana was taken into custody, she was smiling, as though she had done nothing wrong. What was even more shocking was that Vandana was later released on bail, and she continued to live her life in peace. The reason for her release is still unknown. The other 2 men remain in police custody. When I read and heard about this incident, I was stunned. It made me realize that there are people like this in the world, and I truly hope you learned something valuable from this case, especially when parents warn you about someone. Trust them because they know better than you. If Amar Jyoti had listened to his mother's advice, he might still be alive today. But he ignored her, and tragically, both he and his mother are no longer in this world. I really hope you all stay safe, wherever you are. See you next time in the next video. Goodbye.